So I am David Heller. I'm the current board chair of the Federation. And also on the call today, we have Erica Rudin-Luria, who is our president. And I want to welcome all of you. And I'm so pleased that so many of you are on the call at this very challenging time in our community. One of our core strengths of our Jewish community is the commitment to caring and providing for others. And to that end, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland is creating a platform through these webinars to help people understand the impact of COVID-19 on our community. We want to have the chance for you to ask questions directly of the experts. And last week we hosted 2 webinars aimed at parents with young children to help understand the impact of the virus. And today we're proud to host Dr. Shelly Senders to talk about celebrating Passover safely. Today, right now, there's over 110 participants on the call, and I want to thank Erica and the Federation for providing this wonderful opportunity for so many people. Let me introduce Dr. Senders, who is the pediatrician for my 4 children. It's my pleasure to have you on the call. Dr. Senders is a leading pediatrician and founder of Senders Pediatrics. He is a Cleveland native with strong ties to the local community. Dr. Senders has a thriving practice and pioneered the extension of pediatric care through the college years. He's developed an expansive view of pediatrics to include parenting, educational consulting, and research. We're pleased to have him join us today. In this time period of social distancing, Dr. Senders will give us some guidance as we begin to plan our Passover celebrations. Following his remarks, as some of you may have heard me say, he's going to answer questions. Just type your question in the Q&A box, which you'll find in the middle of the bottom of your screen. As you scroll across the bottom, there'll be a little Q&A area, and you can add your questions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Senders. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Erica, for the opportunity to participate. For those of you who know me, this is an opportunity to really talk a little bit about the problem, to provide education, to talk about the unique challenges of Passover, what we must do as a community to prevent the spread of the disease, and how we can keep ourselves emotionally sane during the course of this disease progression. So first, to talk about the data. Earlier today, Governor DeWine signed a stay-of-home order for the state of Ohio, which essentially says don't go any place you don't need to go. There are exemptions for essential activities, including healthcare, food, gasoline, and other essential services, and it's going to actually take a day or 2 for all of us to figure out what this means. As of 2 p.m. today, over 32,000 cases of coronavirus COVID-19 have been diagnosed, and 414 deaths. New York now accounts for half of all cases. The deaths are doubling every 2 days, and ominously, there are over 790 people in serious or critical condition. Just 2 days ago, there were only 60 or 70 in critical condition, and the likelihood is that many of those in serious or critical condition will die. US data supplied by the CDC through late last week showed that the fatality was highest in people over 85 years of age, with a mortality rate of about 27%. There's some data from Washington and the Seattle area that shows that it may be significantly higher than that. It's about 11% in people 65 to 84, about 1 to 3% in people 55 to 64, and less than 1% in people 20 to 54. The other really interesting CDC data is that younger people are ending up in the ICU. Up to 20% of people in ICUs are people in that 20 to 44 range. So this is not a a disease that only affects the elderly. The good news about that age group is that almost all of them recover. In children, the good news is also that they appear to be spared the worst effects. There is a study that came out today that looks at over 2,000 children in China, and found that in that group, 6% had serious side effects. Almost all recovered. There was only one death in that whole situation. The theories as to why children are spared are actually very interesting and somewhat relevant to this conversation. One is that they may just have milder disease or asymptomatic disease. We actually don't know the denominator, and part of the problem with the challenges that we struggle with is that we don't know the denominator. We just don't have enough tests. According to Scott Gottlieb, the former commissioner of the FDA, there will be 75,000 tests released on a daily basis over the next couple of days. So that number will change significantly. But there are two interesting reasons that children may be spared, unlike what happened in 2009 during the H1N1 outbreak, where children were some of the most hard hit. In this case, they appear not to be hit as hard, and part of the reason is that children get lots of respiratory illnesses. In fact, children get coronavirus illnesses, human coronavirus illnesses. The thing that's different about this outbreak is that this is an animal coronavirus, and so it may not be relevant that there are antibodies to those, but it may be that children who have more of these respiratory illnesses are protected. Another piece that is also fascinating is that children get lots of viral vaccines. They get protected against polio, against rotavirus, against measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox. And it may be that just having all of this antiviral antibody in their system may be protecting us, as opposed to adults who haven't seen those types of vaccines for many years. So that's the bad news. The bad news is that this is a disease that is starting to really ramp up, and we're seeing the effect in New York, in New York State, and particularly in New York City. The Imperial College in Great Britain earlier this week came out with a mathematical modeling that suggests that up to 2 million people could die in the United States. And for those of you who know me, I tend to be a very mellow person. I tend to be optimistic. I tend to be reassuring. And for those who have read my posts on our website, I think you've seen a very optimistic tone to those. But sometimes even optimists have to be realists. And although I disagree with some of the mathematical modeling assumptions, or I think there's reason, I'm not strong enough to disagree, but I think there are many people who believe that the mathematical modeling is too intense. Even if 1/10 of those people die, that would be 200,000 people, which is a lot of people. And so the focus here tonight, the focus in all pediatric and adult practices in all hospitals is really on flattening the curve. And flattening the curve, if you look at the curve in the Imperial College analysis, it really talks about how it should be rising over these next couple of weeks, peaking around May 1st, and then dropping down towards the end of July. So that's a lot of time ahead of us. And We need to do things to flatten that curve so it doesn't peak at 2 million, so that it doesn't peak at 200,000, so that it doesn't peak at 100,000. And the way to do that is really to do a lot of the things that Ohio State has actually done pretty well. I think most people in this business give a lot of kudos to Governor DeWine for closing schools early on. That's one of the things that will flatten the curve. Quarantining index cases is another thing that will flatten the curve. And social isolation is the third major thing that will flatten the curve. So I think talking about Passover in the context of all of this is really an important sort of thing, because, you know, when I was preparing for this, I looked at the Pew Foundation analysis of Passover. And so just a couple of years ago, the Pew Foundation found that over 70% of Jewish people celebrate Passover, only 50% celebrate any part of Yom Kippur, and only 23% light candles on Shabbat. So Passover is our holiday. The other interesting thing that I found in doing some work is that 25% of all Americans celebrate a Seder around this time of year. 85% celebrate Easter, 25% celebrate a Seder, even though only 2 to 3% of the total country are Jewish. So there's a lot of there are a lot of people in these next couple of weeks who will be celebrating a Seder. And in an era of skyrocketing numbers, I'm here to tell you that our number one priority as a community is to protect our elderly, because our elderly are the people who are going to die if we don't protect them. And that means that the Seder as we know it this year is going to be a very, very different experience. I'm here to really tell people that people over 70 should not attend a family Seder this year. Again, let me repeat myself. People over 70 should not attend a family Seder. Now, there will be many people who will be able to attend a Seder virtually through Zoom. I think this Zoom conference and many other such conferences are examples of how we can reach out and touch people in electronic ways. FaceTime is a wonderful way to reach out and touch people, and there will be many people who will be able to connect with the elderly by using Zoom. It's interesting, there was an article just the other day in one of the newspapers that struck me because there are many people, many baby boomers, and I guess I'm considered a baby boomer. Many baby boomers think that 60 is the new 40, and what we're discovering is that 60 is really the new 80, and that we people, anyone who is over 60, but particularly over 70, has to be a little bit more careful about this sort of thing. In the Orthodox community, where Zoom is not likely to be an option for a Seder, I think there are many other ways to do it. I think that those people who can do a Seder by themselves should do a Seder by themselves. Those that can't should have one or two individuals join them for the Seder, so that they're able to be fed and they're able to do the Seder. But having multi-family Sedarim is just not in the cards this year, because the likelihood that it will spread and spread and spread goes up significantly the more people there are. How to stay sane in the middle of all this craziness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about science, but I think that understanding this is really the best way to understand how to get through all of this craziness. Imagine that our brain is like my hand. These 4 fingers represent the cerebral cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain. This thumb represents the limbic system. And the way to understand the limbic system is that the limbic system is like a flamethrower in the middle of our brain. It sends anxious, angry, depressed thoughts. And where does it sit? Right next to the cerebral cortex. And what does it do? It sets our brains on fire. There's a lot of bad stuff that I just said, but the rest of my discussion is about how we get through this, this process. So why do we have a flamethrower? Well, in the caveman days, if you didn't have a limbic system and you saw a saber-toothed tiger, you'd go, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty," and you get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. So we evolved a limbic system to help warn us about things that are dangerous. Unfortunately, in the era of COVID-19, that limbic system is shooting off anxious, depressed, angry thoughts. According to one recent study, 57% of adults have experienced irritability over the last week. What did God do to help us? He gave us what's represented by my thumbnail, and that's called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that helps calm things down. The best way that I look at the prefrontal cortex is, imagine if you were a farmer and you had horses and sheep, and all your horses and sheep went running all over the place, and many of them would escape. You'd have to build a fence. So if you built a 1-foot fence, then the sheep would stay behind because they can't lift their legs, but the horses would run away. And if you built a 3-foot fence, then the stronger horses would jump over, everyone else would stay behind. You'd have to build an 8-foot fence in order to hold things back. The problem in 2020, on the 22nd of March, is that we've got a limbic system that's setting our brain on fire, and we've got a 1-foot fence. And so what we need to do is build our fences higher. And how do you build those fences? One is by getting sleep. It's absolutely critical that people get as much sleep as they can. For adults, it should be 7 hours a night. For children 10 years, it should be 10 hours. For children 12 years, it should be 9 hours. For children 14 and 15 years, it should be 8 hours. With kids out of school, there's no excuse for kids not getting enough sleep. The second thing is exercise. Even the governor's stay-at-home rule exempts exercise. There is absolutely no reason for people not to walk outside, not to take hikes. We have excellent metro parks. People should be going to the metro parks not to socialize along the paths, but to really be out in fresh air, because fresh air helps build our prefrontal cortex. Eating. Make sure you eat. Make sure that you eat breakfast. Make sure that you get protein. When you eat carbs, those are empty calories, and what ends up happening is it doesn't help you deal with the stresses. Happiness journaling. There's all sorts of evidence that shows that if you write down 3 things that make you happy each day, or 3 things that for which you have gratitude each day, you will be happier a week later, a month later, 3 months later, and 6 months later, after just doing a week or 2 of that. Get in the habit of doing it every day, and do it with your children. And then finally, volunteering. There's all sorts of evidence in teenagers that you reduce anxiety levels by 30% by doing some sort of volunteering activity. And even though we can't volunteer in person, we can do all sorts of things online to provide volunteering opportunities. One of them that I recommend for teenagers is to be able to volunteer to help out with the elderly, to get 5 people that you can FaceTime with each day and call them and FaceTime with them each day. And it's particularly important to do FaceTime or Skype because there's all sorts of other evidence that shows that the chemical that is responsible for reducing anxiety is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the chemical that is produced by women when they go into labor. It's also the chemical that's produced by women who are breastfeeding. It helps develop connection, and we need to develop a connection. Oxytocin is secreted when you make eye contact. When you make eye contact with people in person, when you make eye contact with people on FaceTime or on Skype. It also is released when you touch someone. And although we can't physically touch people, we need to touch our kids. Arthur Brooks, the social scientist, recommends that every 2 hours, you should hug your child for 45 seconds every 2 hours. If you're being at home and everybody's healthy, there's no reason not to do that. But that's going to help your kids, and that's going to help you. Using Zoom, you know, the number of we're blessed. 10 years ago, had this happened, we wouldn't have had Amazon and we wouldn't have had Zoom, and we wouldn't have been able to get our food, all of the stuff that we need, and we wouldn't have been able to have even this type of event. Have virtual play dates, have virtual dinners. There's no reason why teenagers can't have virtual dinners with each other so that they can share things, share what's going on, look in each other's eyes, and be able to produce the oxytocin that's necessary to reduce anxiety. Chalk messaging. There's no reason why one of our therapists in our office recommend that kids go to their friends' houses and write chalk messages on their driveways, and then walk away, and then have them come back and do it on their driveway. This way, you're not connecting in person, but you're connecting. Making cards, drawing pictures, sending letters. You know, back in the day, we used to send letters. I remember we used to send aerograms when we went from the United States to Israel. Now no one sends aerograms. But what's wrong with sending letters? What's wrong with putting things in people's mailbox? And then finally, again, making a list of 5 people with whom you want to FaceTime each day. All right, so I'm going to stop here and look at some of the questions.
Dr. Senders, let me just remind people that may have joined late. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. Please click on that if you have any questions. That's the way we're doing the Q&A. There's already 9 questions in the queue, and please feel free to write additional questions into the queue, and Dr. Senders will go through those and answer those.
Okay, can you still see me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
We can see you.
Okay. Okay, hold on. Okay, so one question is, we brought home a newborn who has not had her shots. We're keeping distance and not allowing visitors. Is there anything else we should be doing? Thank you. So it turns out that newborns seem to be very protected against this. We don't have a lot of data on newborns, but especially in breastfed babies, there haven't been a lot of cases, even in China. So shots are less important when it comes to COVID virus because the shots protect against bacterial infections. But newborn babies, if you're breastfeeding, that's one of the best things you could do. And again, the goal is not to have lots of other people around. Once a person has COVID-19 virus, can the same person recover and get it again. So the answer is we don't know for sure. There is going to be a IgM, IgG test that will become available soon. This IgM antibodies are produced within 7 days of an infection. IgG antibodies are produced when you are presumably protected. So for example, in infectious mononucleosis or mono, your IgG becomes positive within the first month. Then your IgM becomes positive in the first month. Then when the IgM drops down, the IgG comes up, and there's a period where both IgM and IgG are positive. And then the IgG suggests that you have permanent immunity. It appears that there is an IgG response. And if you do develop that IgG, the likelihood is that you will be protected. We don't know for sure, but that's the likelihood. Let's see. Should immediate family members be quarantining from one another? The answer is no. If you've been exposed, that means that you should be quarantining for 14 days. If somebody, let me step back. If someone has COVID-19, in other words, they have a dry cough, they have a fever, some people have diarrhea in the beginning of that, but they really feel sick. Yes, it could be the flu, but the likelihood is that it's going to be COVID-19. That means that you need to isolate yourself for 7 days or 3 days after you're feeling completely better, or whichever is longer. So it could be, it's a minimum of 7 days, it could be longer. That individual is presumed clear after that period. It is possible to shed virus up to 30 days, but the current CDC recommendations are that those individuals need to be isolated for that 7-day period. Everyone else in the house has to be isolated for 14 days. And the reason is that statistically 50% will develop symptoms within 5.5 days, and 97% will develop symptoms within 11 days. 99% will develop symptoms within 14 days. So the 14-day number was picked to coincide with that 99% period. Is there a maximum number I'd recommend be at a Seder? I actually, again, the current recommendations is less than 10 congregating. If you have a family of 9 children and 2 parents, obviously you're not going to farm out one of your children. That child is a part of your family. But the goal should be to limit your Sedarim to the 6 range, and not to invite friends or guests over for the Seder. Okay, so this is a similar one. 2 family units, one with 4 kids and the other parents and grandparents who are 62 and healthy. And both family units have been self-quarantining since Purim, and they continue to self-quarantine. Could those families not sensibly spend Yom Tov together? Is there room for some nuanced application of who the families are when assessing whether or not it is wise to be together? So again, I'm all about nuance. The key factor here is what kind of quarantining you're doing. So yes, if everybody is quarantining and you're not going out and you're not being exposed to other people, you could theoretically do that. But the reason that I'm mentioning this as an exception that proves the rule, because yes, that this is telling people that you're really doing some very strong distancing, and recognizing that at any point that could be messed up. but for the vast majority of people, that's not possible. And that's why the rule I established at the beginning is the one that I think we should stick with for most people. Okay, if my parents are in their 50s, good health, and we see them regularly, can we continue to have a Seder with them? Again, I think that people who are in their 50s are in good health can have a Seder together. The people we're trying to protect are the people over 70. There is a slightly increased risk between 60 and 70, but the people over 70 are the people who are really at the highest risk. Can 2 to 3 people over 80 have a Seder together? The real challenge is in what context? You know, if they're healthy people and they're living together in a similar context, then yes. But the more people over 80 that are together, the more likely you are to get into trouble. How to have a safe Seder, number of people, silverware, plastic, relatives, friends, place to hold it. You know, my suggestion, again, I've talked about number of people. There's no reason that you have to change your silverware. You can use plasticware, you can use silverware. You know, if you use hot water, if you use a dishwasher, you're not going to spread it from yourself to yourself. It's only if other people have had those sorts of things. Relatives, friends, you know, my sense is, again, we should be doing our Sedarim separately this year. I'd love to have my relatives over. I'd love to have my friends over, but that's not what we should be doing this year. Playing tennis outside is an exercise. Absolutely. It is absolutely fine to play tennis. If you're playing with another person, that person is presumably, unless you're playing a different kind of tennis than I do, 6 feet away from you. And no, you shouldn't be going into a locker room together, but if you're going to a public or private tennis court and you're not sitting there and hugging each other afterwards, it's perfectly fine. I cannot emphasize enough how important exercise is. Exercise is going to keep us healthy during this period of time, and we have to find ways to do exercise. All the gyms are closed, and so it's going to make us discover walking in our neighborhoods. And thank God the temperature is going up a little bit, although what I haven't mentioned yet is that there is some evidence that this virus lives most effectively between 40 and 55 degrees. Again, everything we know could change tomorrow, but there's a fascinating modeling article that came out about 2 weeks ago that actually has predicted all of the cities that are likely to be affected. New York City was predicted for last week and this week. Vancouver is predicted. St. Louis is predicted, and it will start going higher, more and more north as the weather improves. So once the humidity goes up, it tends to drop off. Yes, there will be many people who will tell me stories about Florida and Brazil and places like that, but by and large, temperate areas have been the areas that have been hardest hit. And as the humidity rises, this will hopefully get better. And as the temperature gets much higher, this will be hopefully better. So we're talking about these next couple of months being a challenge. Can you test negative and then later on test positive? That's maybe one of the best questions to ask. You could test negative today and tomorrow test positive. That's the problem with the test that we have currently. That's why this antibody test is absolutely the most critical test, because I believe that many people are already immune. But we don't know that. And because we don't know that, we've got to isolate everybody. And it's killing our economy. It has to kill our economy right now until we can get past this. But the real solution is to really find out who is protected and who is not protected. Let's see. Should older people be concerned with things like getting mail from the mailbox for fear of getting the virus? No. There are all sorts of studies that this can be spread and it could live on cardboard for a period of time and on paper for a period of time, but that's in a laboratory. And the people who wrote that article actually commented on it in the conclusion, but no one read the conclusion. They said this is all in vitro, which means in a laboratory. In regular day in and day out use, the likelihood of something remaining alive on a piece of paper in a mailbox is close to zero. So I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to get mail. Should you be paying attention to eating food, including matzah handled by others? Again, the people who are in your, who are at your Seder, they can handle your matzah, because if they can't handle your matzah, they can't be at your Seder. But if they can handle your matzah, if they can be at your Seder, then they can handle your matzah. Kids coming back from Israel, should they quarantine for 2 weeks? Yes, they should. I didn't say that a couple of weeks ago, but based on the data now coming out of Israel, they should quarantine for 2 weeks. I also will comment because I have taken the stance in the past that it would be okay for kids to have play dates with one other family. I think we need to move past play dates. I think for the next couple of weeks, and I will get a lot of flack for this, but I think that the solution is, if you've got kids, have one kid be across the street and have you be across the street, and you can have a play date that way. But people should not be going into each other's homes as much as possible. Do I recommend people not to get pregnant during this time? No, no. People need to go on with their lives. The incidence of COVID virus in the first trimester is the side effects of COVID in the first trimester are not so good. There's a lot of evidence that there are more spontaneous miscarriages during that period of time. But for people who are pregnant, the likelihood of you transmitting this to a child is almost zero. There's many, many studies so far that have shown no, in people with serious life-threatening COVID pneumonias sitting in ICUs who deliver babies, there is no COVID virus in breast milk. There's no COVID virus in amniotic fluid. There's no COVID virus in any of the eye secretions that the baby has. So people who are pregnant should be good. You should speak to your OBs about this, but most of the data suggests that you're in good shape. As far as becoming pregnant, we Jews are very positive, optimistic people, and we have gone through pogroms and thousands of years of torture and Holocaust. And what we've learned from our parents and grandparents who made it through the Holocaust is that they never lost hope, and they continue to have children. And if you go back to even in Egypt, which is the holiday that we're celebrating, in the middle of all of that, people had children. So we need to continue to have children. Please define immediate family. If you're in a situation where grandparents spend several days a week with grandchildren and they sleep over one night a week, is this considered immediate family? Yes. Most people believe that if grandparents are part of your life and are there on a regular basis, they would be considered immediate family. My son is coming home from yeshiva and is on immunosuppressants. His rabbi just started experiencing a fever and has gotten tested but doesn't know the results. What's your recommendation for his protocol? So, you know, it's interesting. President Trump talked about hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. There's an article in tomorrow's Wall Street Journal that talks about the use of chloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug, and Zithromax, which is used for pneumonias. And they've actually found some very good benefit. The studies have been done in vitro, which means in the laboratory. The first studies are now being done in vivo. And again, I would refer you to that article to read more about it. People who are on Imuran and methotrexate for Crohn's disease or for other lupus and things like that should speak to their rheumatologist about what to do. There is no evidence so far that immunosuppressants actually actually increase the chance that you will develop COVID-19. The same reason that the immunosuppressants seem to suppress your immune system, there are some suggested studies that show that they may actually make it less likely that you will get COVID-19. There is no evidence so far that people on immunosuppressants have a higher incidence. That may change tomorrow, but I can only speak to where we are right now. Would I recommend 86-plus-year-olds to walk around the block for exercise in isolation by themselves as a couple, or should they stay inside? Please go outside. Please go outside. If you're healthy, remember, if you're 86, the chances of you getting to 100, if we can keep you protected, are far greater than the rest of us who are not 86. And so go outside, take a walk. If you're in a building with an elevator, be careful about who is in the elevator. Don't get into an elevator with other people. But going outside for a walk as a couple, if you live in the house together, is something that's very healthy. Should we take extra precautions at the Seder, like an empty seat between people, serving food with gloves? No. I actually, unless you want to leave that seat for Elijah the prophet, who visits all of our Sedarim, I actually think that doing that is not necessarily going to accomplish it. Remember, the goal is to be doing it with your immediate family. These are people who are with you. I would rather you not have someone else over than put a seat between you, because you're going to get up and you're going to be talking and you're going to be washing and you're going to be going to the bathroom. If you're worried enough to put a seat, you shouldn't be having that person there. How long do I think the strict isolation will last? So I'm going to take a deep breath and tell you, in my heart of hearts, if the curve that we've been talking about is real, that curve is likely not to reach its bottom until the end of July. That's a long time. That means no backyard camps. That means very likely no summer camps for kids. There are some people who feel this will go on for 5 months. I think we have to take it a couple of months at a time. There's clearly not going to be any school the rest of this year. But again, I think that this is, again, if you look at the data, it's going to go on for some time. So why are playgrounds closed if the virus can't live on surfaces outside? mostly because we don't want people playing on playgrounds together. That's really the issue. You're not going to get it from a teeter-totter, but you are going to get it from the person who you're sitting with on your side of the teeter-totter, hugging them as the other side is going up and down. So that's the major reason that playgrounds are closed. Would I recommend playing at a playground? I would recommend going to a backyard playground. And if you have one in your backyard, if someone else is willing to let you play on their playground and you're not sitting there really playing together, that would be helpful. The governor of Ohio today issued a stay of home order. Is my recommendation that Seders with 10 people or fewer is okay in conflict with this order. We don't actually really know all of the details of this order. I think it just came out today. There have been more, the ODH website crashed right afterwards, so we don't really have a lot of data. I think I've been pretty clear that I really don't recommend Sedarim with more than one couple. And so that's why if you took the 10 number from this conversation, you're not hearing me clearly. I'm really saying if you have 9 kids, you can have a Seder with 10 people. But if you don't, you need to have a Seder by yourself. That's the recommendation that I'm making, and I can't say it more clearly than the way I'm saying it. Is there risk in eating carryout food from restaurants where the people cooking, handling the food could be infected unbeknownst to them? Some really interesting data came out just a couple of days ago that showed that that is not a risk, that COVID, although it can lift, we do not get COVID from swallowing it. We get it from swallowing it in food. That seems to be a very unlikely source. Technically, it could be on the person who delivers it to you. So the recommendation is to take the food out of its packaging, throw the packaging away, and don't worry about it. The heat of most food makes it unlikely that will be a problem. And again, when we're talking about community, I can't tell you how important it is to support our institutions of every stripe. The kosher institutions are at particular risk because their margins are very low, but all food institutions need to be supported. We need food. I said that about a half hour ago, and we also need them to stay in business. For those with 3D printers, are there people to reach out to about printing medical equipment? It's a very fascinating question, and I can find out more about that information. What I didn't say earlier is that all of the questions that I don't get to answer, I will try to do a Q&A so that, and then we can put this on the Federation website. I've been delivering groceries to my mom in her mid-80s several times a week, albeit keeping my distance, but I've touched all of the items. Should we have Seders together or not? The kids have traveled from New York within the last week and have not been fully quarantined. No, I'm sorry to say this, but touching the items, I'm not so concerned about you touching the items because you're healthy. But we shouldn't be having Sedarim with your mom in her mid-80s. The kids who have traveled from New York need to be quarantined, but we shouldn't be having a Sedarim in that area. What about a vaccine? There are a lot of, I think one of the most exciting things from a medical perspective is that we are unleashing what the creativity we have in this country in ways that are exciting to those of us who are on the front lines. There are companies that may have vaccines in a couple of months. Most people say there won't be a real vaccine for 12 to 18 months, and I have to tell you, it's got to be a good vaccine, and it's got to be a safe vaccine. As someone who struggles with anti-vaxxers all of the time, I have to tell you that the worst thing we could do as a country is to rush a vaccine, even though it will save lives. But if it causes side effects, it will ultimately kill people because it will prevent people from using vaccines for other things. So we need a good vaccine. Is cleaning help okay? So I've been asked this question a number of times over the last week. Is cleaning help okay? It really depends on where that cleaning help has been. And it's really the same. We have an employee who was out of the state. And, you know, you can see where people have been now. You can look on Facebook and see where people have been. If you have not been isolated, we're not allowing employees who come from outside the state, who have not been careful about what they've been doing, to come work in our office. They're going to have to take PTO and isolate in order to be able to make sure that we only bring healthy people in our office. In our office, we have 3 isolation rooms, which are only for people with with any respiratory symptom. And we've done we call them curbside car care visits. We've done those for the last week. We've seen over 150 people that way, in full gear, to be able to protect them and to be able to protect ourselves. So cleaning help, again, you've just got to find out where they are, and if they want to work for you, they have to make sure that they're protecting themselves. Does vitamin C help prevent COVID-19? So this gets into the whole issue of things that might be helpful, and there isn't any data on it. There's no data that vitamin C protects against COVID-19. There is data that too much vitamin C is not good for you. There have been questions. There is some data that zinc in small amounts for up to 7 days, if you come down with symptoms. If you take Cold-EEZE or zinc lozenges and put it under your tongue once a day for 7 days, that zinc can be helpful. I just reviewed all of the data on echinacea. There's no evidence that echinacea can do that. Elderberry, there was some original data that suggested that elderberry might be helpful. Again, there's no data on elderberry with COVID-19. Cooking food and delivering care packages to the people who would have attended your Seder, please, please do that. That's one of the best things you can do. Your food is fine. It's just that we just don't want to expose people to other things. So your food is fine. And as I said before, your food is really no different than takeout food, and it really should be good. Should my brother and his girlfriend who live in Boston go down to Long Island to share a Seder with my parents in Long Island? My parents are 63 years old and healthy. You know, again, everything I've said tonight says, please don't do it. It's just not worth to travel long distances. You don't know who you've been exposed to in these situations. How long should people from New York quarantine? They're no different than anybody else. You know, New York is just 2 weeks ahead of us, I think. and we should not be more strict than the CDC. I think we've got to listen to what the leadership is saying, but we shouldn't be more strict than what the CDC is saying. Let's see. Someone says, if 70 shouldn't attend, how about 60 to 70? So I don't have a good answer for that. Again, the data on 70 is much higher. The curve goes up starting at 60, but the curve really goes up at 70. All right, I think we're getting to the end. Without a vaccine likely by next season, do you expect this to happen again next year? So that's a really interesting question. The data that comes from Washington State, Seattle, suggests that once you get to a critical mass of people, you actually, things start slowing down, and hopefully we will develop some immunity. Now, many of us believe that COVID-19 will become like flu, and you'll get a COVID-19 or a COVID-20 or COVID-21 vaccine every year that will be a little bit different. So I want to end my piece at 7:59. I want to end my piece with a little message from Lord Jonathan Sacks. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote a piece on the difference between crowds and community. A crowd, he notes, is where individuals lose their individuality. A kind of collective mentality takes over, and people find themselves doing what they would never consider doing on their own. Sometimes this expresses itself in violence, at other times in impulsive economic behavior, giving rise to unsustainable booms and subsequent crashes. Crowds lack the inhibitions and restraints that form our inner controls as individuals. A community, by contrast, is a group of individuals who unite together, not in a frenzied act of fear or with a destructive lack of control, but because they are similarly focused on one goal, one purpose. We see that type of community in last week's Torah portion, where the Jewish people came together to contribute all that they could to construct the tabernacle. Says Rabbi Sacks, communities build, they do not destroy. They bring out the best in us, not the worst. They speak not to the baser emotions, such as fear, but to higher aspirations like building a symbolic home for the divine presence in their midst. While they changed their name from the Jewish Community Federation to the Jewish Federation of Cleveland a few years ago to help with branding, one of the most amazing things about our federation is its expertise in building community. Hopefully this event and events like it will allow us all to move me'avdut lecherut, from servitude to the coronavirus, a sort of house arrest, to freedom to do whatever we need and want once this pandemic is beyond us. Thank you for listening.
Dr. Senders, I know that I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much. I know that I learned, and I'm certain that the others that joined us on the call did learn. And I think one thing special about the Jewish people is that we see the long term. And so what you are telling us and the advice that you've given us is really to keep the long view in mind. And that right now we need to physically distance ourselves so that in the long term we can be together and be physically together in the future. I want to say to everyone on the call that the Jewish community is looking to support you right now. We understand, we know that this is a difficult time for the entire community. And if you know someone who's struggling in this increasingly difficult time, please contact Access Jewish Cleveland at 216-292-INFO. We've arranged for a therapist from Jewish Family Service Association to be on call during the week, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And we're also happy to connect you with many, many other services. Please join us for the next webinar on Tuesday, March 24th at 5:30 to cover how safely to care for someone with coronavirus without getting coronavirus, with Dr. Robert Salata, Chairman of the Department of Medicine at Case Western Reserve University. We look forward to seeing you all on Zoom then. Thank you very much, Dr. Senders. Thank you, everyone, and wishing everyone an early Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Dr. Senders. This concludes the call, and thank you to everyone participating.